Let me go over your ballot really quick, and I'll let you take it uh, player by player. First guy on the list, and I love this guy. I played with him when he was a young player. I mentioned him earlier. Best defensive center fielder I've ever seen. And I was fortunate enough to play with a lot. Go with Andruw Jones.
Andruw Jones for me, Booney. I love the way you framed it because you used the word best in terms of the history of the game. You want to go with those that have that word that ends in est, greatest, best, whatever it is. He fits that category, and he won 10 Gold Gloves in a row. And when you're able to do that at that position, I know the point's been made by other veteran players who played with Andruw that if he had retired after those first 10 years, just walked away from the game, we would have said first ballot Hall of Famer. And then he hangs on a bit and his numbers go down, which is what is supposed to happen in your 30s. And for some reason, he's getting criticized for that, for just having a normal aging curve where you're not the same player at 35 that you were when you were 25. That's supposed to be the case. And so I have a real issue with the notion that he played himself out of the Hall of Fame in some way. He was still, by the way, a valuable player later in his career to the Yankees. It was in more of a platoon role, but he was still a good ball player. And the peak was so great on some historically significant teams in Atlanta, Bret, that he belongs in there. And I look at it and say, that's part of the reason why I like Torrey as a Hall of Famer too. You compare their resumes. Andruw was obviously maybe more of a pure power hitter during those times, but still 10 Gold Gloves for Jones, 9 Gold Gloves for Torrey. It's a somewhat similar resume, and I think it's helped in Andrew's case by playing on a team that, as you saw it right up close, historically significant. The playoff streak the Braves had, he was a huge part of that. They don't have that streak without Andruw Jones.
I agree. And when you talk about, because let's be honest, Johnny, people aren't getting elected defensively, unless you're Ozzie Smith. Omar Vizquel's finding that out right now. But if there is a spot in the Hall of Fame, if we're going to just strictly go on the greatest defensive center fielder ever, I'm with you. I'm picking Andruw Jones. Man, he just was a little bit better. And I hate it because Ken Griffey Jr. is the best player I ever played with. Andrew's better in center field defensively. I'm sorry. I saw it for 1 year. That Maddox, Smoltz, Glavine, they would rave about it. I saw Bobby Cox, and this is a true story. I saw Bobby Cox. Andruw made another one of his plays, and Bobby Cox said, "Willie Mays my ass." And I remember him saying that, and I'm going, wow, Bobby's seen Willie Mays play, and he's saying Andrew's better. So when they start telling you you're better than Willie Mays in center field defensively, that's a pretty high praise coming from Bobby Cox. All right, so we got Andruw Jones and Hunter Mauer. For me, Mauer's a first ballot Hall of Fame catcher just from the offensive prowess that he showed that was so much better than pretty much all his peers.
3 batting titles in 4 years as a catcher, Bret. That is
unbelievable.
Right there, period, full stop. That had never been done before by a catcher in the history of the game. We just talked about that, the historic quality of the achievements. When you hang a plaque in the Great Hall and say, he did something that was never done before, that's what Joe Mauer did. 3 batting titles in 4 years as a catcher. And the entire story, it's not, and obviously this is sort of supporting anecdotal information on his overall achievements, but the batting titles were great. The defensive ability behind the plate was great. And the fact that he played for one franchise, happened to be his hometown team, which drafted him first overall. He's born in St. Paul. He plays his entire career in Minneapolis, went to the same high school as his final manager in the big leagues, Paul Molitor. You start adding up these different threads of a story, Bret. Is really remarkable what he was able to achieve. And I just think that stroke, as I would love to hear your thoughts just as a fellow hitter, why it works so well, because it seemed to me that he had as compact of a swing as it got. And one of my favorite details as well, in addition to the great three batting titles, he broke up 3 no-hitters in the 9th inning. And that's the kind of thing, Booney, as a fellow player that I'm sure you love, the ability to focus in on a day when the other guy has his absolute best stuff. It seemed like Joe Mauer, like his swing was so short and simple that you just could not beat him. And he found a way. By the time that third or fourth plate appearance kicked in, he wasn't going to let you beat him in the ninth inning.
He was, to me, I mean, when you win a batting title, that's a different level. But I used to watch Joe Mauer hit, and he was kind of coming into the game as my career was winding down. So I got to see Joe as a young player. And the first thing that comes into my mind from the offensive side, I think you hit it on the head when you said, especially at the catching position. And I have a big appreciation for it the farther I get away from the game, of the physical of the catching position, putting the gear on day in, day out, getting behind that plate, and then having to hit. At the time, I thought, no, it's no different than doing this or doing that. There is a difference. So I give him extra points for being a catcher and doing it. But when I watched him from the very beginning, the one guy that came in mind, and one of my favorite men in all the game of baseball, and a teammate of mine for 3 years in Seattle, Johnny Olerud. And the same approach and the same demeanor and the same poise and the same, the ability to slow that heartbeat down and to slow that breath down. Joe Mauer had it. I think of a young Chipper Jones, how poised he was. And I remember in 1995 watching Chipper Jones going, this kid's 21 years old. Bobby Cox is hitting him third. And look at him. He's acting like he's 50. He's 50 years old. He's on the veterans committee, the way he behaved. You don't see that too much. When we're young, we're hungry. Our hair's on fire. We got to prove to everybody how good you are. We're aggressive. And Chipper just had that uncanny ability to slow down his heart, slow down his breath, and act like that mature guy. Like, yeah, I'm 21. I'm in the middle of this great Braves lineup. Watch me. And we did. And man, was I impressed, because I knew what was going on in my brain at 21, and I didn't look like Chipper looked. Johnny Olerud, same thing. He just had that uncanny ability to slow it down. I'm getting long-winded here, but long story short, that's what I saw with a young Joe Mauer. That's Johnny Olerud. And now you do it as a catcher. That's first ballot for me.
And that's a great call, Brett, on that comparison between Olerud and Mauer. And on the catching position, I remember I had a conversation with your dad a long time ago, and he had a great piece of advice about the catching position, because I asked him, I think your dad's like most games caught in a season were in like his age 40 or 41 year. It was incredible how many games he caught late into his career. And he said to me that, and I had never really thought of it this way, he said basically he learned the further he went in the game, while you might think that it's harder and harder to catch when you're in your late 30s. And obviously it is. But your dad said that he was able to figure out physically and also mentally what it took to get out there. And that it was almost like he learned in his body what he needed to do to be able to be that available for his team, which to me just like blew my mind that he told me it actually got easier the further he got in his career. For most mere mortals, Brett, they would say it's the opposite. But your dad actually said that something about knowing maybe how to set up, how to take care of himself, how to prepare for a game, how to prepare for an off season, that those types of preparation elements got easier for him the older he got, which is just something that it struck me as so extraordinary that I've remembered it all these years later. And I've just never forgotten when your dad told me that.
Yeah, he's told me those stories too. And actually, if you look at his career and how not only was he just really smart, the guys like my dad, and I didn't come to appreciate the catching position, like I said, until I was retired. And now I watch and the mind games and the presence you have to have back there. As a hitter, I'd hit off different things, but it was bullpen. It was who's hitting behind me. What have I done this series? Who's in the bullpen? What have I done this series? But it was also, how smart is this catcher? Is he thinking with me, or is he just putting down numbers? If he throws me a fastball, I hit a ball in the gap. Does that eliminate fastball for this catcher because he doesn't want to throw me another fastball? Well, if that's the case, this is easy pickings. I've just eliminated a pitch. But I don't want those smart guys that the Jason Varitek used to drive me crazy, because I'd be sitting on a pitch. He'd throw me a different pitch. He'd raise his mask and look at me and kind of go, Boone, you ain't looking for that pitch, are you? And I'm like, damn it. Now the chess game begins.
Well, you're right.
Those guys. Bob Boone was one of those guys.
That's a great point. And two, I've heard catchers say this as well, that because of the nature of their position defensively, when you think about it, they're tracking every pitch. So
They see your
they
body
know
language. Right.
they know exactly where the strike zone is on that day, and their eyes are so good. And so when it comes to understanding the strike zone, what pitches to offer at, they know it intrinsically in a way that honestly the rest of the players in the diamond don't have that same exposure to the strike zone every single pitch. And you look at, I think Jorge Posada, one of his best years offensively was his last year. He was just he I think much like your dad seemed to get better with age, and that's why catchers are special, and why, as I mentioned with Yachty, it's going to be such an easy yes. Whatever his career batting average was, fine. All I know is that he was there every year, and one of my favorite stats about Yachty, who we'll get to on a future ballot, but his immediate predecessor as the Cardinals' everyday catcher opening day. So the opening day catcher in 2004 was Mike Matheny, who Yachty's career and streak of opening day starts was still going by the time Matheny had managed him and then lost the job. And Yachty was still starting every day on opening day. Like, that just tells you the longevity of the great catchers.
Next two, we'll take them two at a time. Adrian Beltre, who was a teammate of mine, I think strictly from a numbers standpoint, I mean, tremendous Gold Glove caliber, year in and year out third baseman. But the numbers are, they're up there with the greatest numbers of all time from that position. To me, it's a no-brainer. So we'll go with Adrian Beltre and Carlos Beltran, who I looked at Beltran's numbers, better than I thought they were. Impressive, had that stolen base, home run combo. Take those two just briefly.
Yes. So Beltre, it's interesting to me, Booney, because I remember back to that 05 year. If you had told me right then that he was going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer,
No
I don't
way.
think it was clear at that point. It was not at all clear. He actually did not make his first All-Star team until his 13th Major League season in 2010 with the Boston Red Sox, the 1 year he spent in Boston. And then that kind of set himself up. He then signs the long-term deal with Texas. And Texas, it wasn't until his fourth team that he became a Hall of Famer. And that was where he eventually got 3,000 hits. He finished in the top 10 of the MVP multiple times once he got to Texas. Of course, he had a huge year in LA right before he signed with the Mariners. But I think that, to me, the durability, the availability, the reliability, I think he made it to the big leagues so early, Brett. He was just 18 years old with the Dodgers. He gets there in the late 90s when that team was still, you think about those mid to late 90s Dodgers, that was still a team that was in flux a lot at that point. And he gets to the big leagues early, super early. And I just think that he was able to stay around the major leagues long enough to certainly, as you mentioned, compile the 3,000 hits and all the home runs that he hit and all the Gold Gloves at third base. He just stayed in such a freshness and love for the game that I think it kept the game fresh for him and propelled him on this amazing career. But he did not become a Hall of Famer until his fourth team, which I think is just a great story of perseverance for young players today, that it takes a while sometimes, and Adrian got there. Beltran, for me, one of the best switch hitters ever, that elite group of switch hitters with a certain number of home runs. He had more RBI, Brett, than Mickey Mantle. I know people are criticizing him at times for the sign stealing scandal with the Astros. And listen, I understand the severity of it, but that was in his final year. And he was a 40-year-old player at that point who had already had the Hall of Fame resume. I don't think it's fair for people to still criticize him for that and try to keep him out of the Hall for something that happened in his final major league season.
I agree with you. I agree with you on both. And look, I look at your ballot, and I don't know that I would, because I don't have to vote and I don't vote, but I don't know if I'd circle everyone you circled, but I've been looking at it, and there's definitely a point to be made to each and every pick that made out there. I'll take the next two veteran guys, Gary Sheffield, who for me, that's a no doubter for me. He's one of the best hitters of my time, unorthodox as they come. I tell young hitters, don't hit like Gary. There's exceptions to the rule. Gary could hook the sinker away down the left field line, wrap it around the foul pole for a home run. But I wouldn't suggest taking that approach. He was one of a kind, but he's one of the true great hitters of my generation that everybody loved. He had the iconic batting style. But just a great, great hitter, batting champ. The numbers are all there for me. I think he's one of those guys that should have been in years ago for me. So take him and Todd Helton.
Yes. Chef, I love this about Chef, among many things, Bret. 400 more walks than strikeouts. Think about that.
Amazing.
And compare it to today's game. When you've got 400 more walks than strikeouts and more than 500 home runs, that is elite of the elite. You talk about understanding the strike zone, doing damage, one of the most feared hitters of his time. I would love to, anybody that does not vote for Chef, maybe just queue up a tape of everybody who played third base against him and just have them all talk for a while and then decide afterward if you still want to not vote for him after listening to what they have to say. And listen, they're certainly, you look at his career as one of the great journalists who I trust a lot has talked about different candidates. You believe in his career because the player he was when he began was the player he was at the end. The consistency of the production was there. The reliability of the run production was there. I just think, and also one of the great characters in the game. I can't wait. Hopefully he'll become a Hall of Famer. His speech, Booney, is going to be one of the great speeches ever because his personality is just so unique and so authentic. I love the authenticity of Chef. So he's an easy vote for me, yes. And Todd Helton, we talk so much about Coors Field. The power numbers there, I actually had a conversation with Tulo about this, Troy Tulowitzki in recent days. He said, listen, yes, the big gaps help. It's a great place to hit. But the expanse of the outfield, the power numbers there are real. If you're hitting a bunch of home runs at Coors, yeah, your doubles and some of the other, you get a lot of base hits that drop in front of outfielders because of just how big the outfield is. Mm-hmm. But the power numbers there are real. And for someone that spent his entire career in Colorado, helped get that team to the World Series, one of the pure hitters of his time, just in terms of just bat to ball, tremendous skill, hand-eye, it's all there. And people forget, and Tulo talked about this with me as well, when you left Denver on a road trip, and you know this from having played there and then traveled away from there, the ball spins differently. Your body responds differently. Every time that you got on the plane and left there and then came back, it took a toll on your body. And Todd was able to be there, available in the lineup, playing hurt, dependable, reliable, Hall of Famer for me all day long.
I'm with you on Todd. I mean, he was just a great hitter. It's unfortunate, because of Colorado. They've done some things since I finished playing with the humidor to try to contain it a little bit better. But just because you're drafted by the Colorado Rockies or you're traded to the Colorado Rockies and you're great, it's like you got one strike against you. Oh, because it's always going to be because it's Coors. I played against a lot of great players, Johnny. Played with a lot of great players. Larry Walker, I can count on one hand, one of the best baseball players I've ever been around. And that means catch, throw, run the bases. People don't think about that. How good did he run the base? He was an unbelievable base runner. He was an unbelievable smart player. A guy that's in the same category for me with a Larry Walker is a Jeff Bagwell. Everybody knows the numbers are there, but as a baseball player, the intricacies, the things that I see on a daily basis, people didn't know. I said, do you realize how unbelievable of a base runner Jeff Bagwell is? He never makes a mistake. He always gets a good jump. You never pick him off. These are the little things that I would notice. And it hurt Larry a little bit too when he got inducted to the Hall of Fame. People are, the Colorado numbers. I'm like, it's one of the best baseball players I've ever been around. So I feel bad for the Colorado because no matter how great you are, you're always going to have that strike against you. Oh, it's just because of where you play.
That's a great point, Booney. And then just on the base running angle, a quick story for you. I think that's one of the reasons why Scott Rowland got in the Hall of Fame, and deservedly so, this past year was his base running. And one of my favorite stories that we told around the time that the induction ceremony happened was, so Skip Schumacher, of course, now the Marlins manager, and you can identify with this story being a second baseman. The first time once Rowland went to Cincinnati, of course, he had gone to Toronto and then Cincinnati. So he's back in the NL Central playing against the Cardinals. And that rivalry for a few years was as heated as any in the sport, Cardinals and Reds. So now the Cardinals are playing against Rowland. And Chris Carpenter, before the first game of the first series they played against each other, he went out and bought Skip Schumacher a pair of soccer shin guards because they were going to be playing against Scott Rowland. And he said, Skip, you're going to want to wear these playing against Rowland. Think about that. He had to alter his uniform because of how hard Scott would slide into second base. And Skip said, I had to put it on because Carp, everybody admires Chris so much. He said, the veteran said, put him on. And he said, it's a good thing he had it. Actually, Skip said, as time went on in his career, he started continuing to wear some shin guards playing second base out in the field because of how hard some guys would slide. And Rollins is one of those guys.
Yep. I will take these guys as a combo. They played against each other or played with each other in the middle for a long time. Chase Utley and Mr. Rollins. We've got them both on the ballot.
I really hope, Booney, that Utley's support in year one for him will help people give a second look to Jimmy Rollins, because this is the longest running double play combo in the National League. We've talked before about Whitaker and Trammell in the American League and MLB overall, but I look at them as a great duo, and they belong in, I think, both of them. Utley, you mentioned, I think he's a really interesting test case in terms of the duration of the peak. The peak that he had was dominant. He was one of the best all-around players in the game for a period of about 4 to 5 years. Injuries happened later on, obviously, but he was on some significant teams in Philly, back-to-back World Series, great October performer. When you think about all the home runs that Chase hit in the month of October and what he meant, I think he turned a pretty good double play. Obviously, defensively wasn't great, but solid. And so I think that his numbers, what he was able to do, stand out because of just the greatness of the peak, whereas Jimmy was more of a long-term greatness in terms of the number of games that he played, number of hits, he's actually a unique shortstop in the history of the game, the only one that have hit certain numbers of triples, stolen bases, and home runs that Jimmy was able to hit. So as a switch hitter, I just think he was at his peak. It was an NL MVP. Booney, for me, it's a great double play combination that I hope is one day honored together because of what they meant in a great baseball city in Philadelphia.
Great points on that. The last one is, and this is interesting to me because we're coming into an era now where it's going to be more prevalent, the closer role. It was pretty obvious at the beginning. It's Mariano, and then it's Trevor. And then after that, it's like, well, now who gets in? You're looking at Billy Wagner. I look at Billy Wagner's numbers. He's got 400 and some saves, 2.3, I think, throughout his career for an ERA. The closers are going to have to start getting into the game at that position. And I'm looking at Billy Wagner. I'm on board with you on Billy Wagner. It's like, well, it starts, all right, Mariano's at the top for pretty much everybody. Hoffy, in everybody's mind, kind of in the history of the game because the save, didn't come into vogue until, I don't know, different people will say different times. But obviously Trevor's number 2. And then after that, it's like, well, they can't be the only 2 in the Hall of Fame. There's a closer on every team, and there's going to be more and more. So I'm with you on Wagner. Speak a little bit on Billy Wagner.
Sure. I think one thing, Booney, that I'm looking at very carefully now is how many innings do we now look at as the threshold to be a closer and get in? And Wagner was at least able to get over 900. Typically, when I look at relievers, I would have liked for them to have 1,000 innings. That's just a general benchmark. But for those that are truly dominant in the way that Billy Wagner has been truly dominant, I'm willing to grant an exception. And when you look at, to your point, the number of closers who have retired from the game with at least 900 innings and then 400 saves plus an ERA under 2.5, it's just Mariano and Wagner. That's it. The only 2. And so that peak of the dominance that Billy had, I believe he belongs. I love it too. Arguably, his best season was his last one, 2010. The bullpen in Atlanta, of course, he pitches for Bobby Cox in Cox's last year as a manager. That bullpen had a young Craig Kimbrell and a young Johnny Venters at that time in 2010. And that year, Wagner made his 7th All-Star appearance. He had an ERA under 2, and he retired right afterward. And so if you look at it and say, could he have stayed on and gotten more numbers? Of course. But I just think that he made the decision for his family. It was the right time to walk away at the age of 39. He was as good then as he ever was. And so I just think that the swing and miss, He never walked a lot of guys. Really historically significant closer, pitched on some great teams in Houston, obviously. Think about how many players from that era will be in the Hall of Fame with the Astros, then, of course, went on to the Phillies and the Mets, the Red Sox briefly, and then finishing up with the Braves. It's a historically significant career for somebody, Booney, that I love this part of the story. Naturally right-handed. What? He was right-handed, broke his arm twice when he was 7 years old, and learns how to throw left-handed, and then throws 100 miles an hour. I mean, that story, Booney, you've been around the game a long time. You're a right-handed dominant person, and then you flip around and throw left-handed 100 miles an hour. I mean, that's one of the most impressive stories I've heard in the history of Major League Baseball. He goes to Division III Ferrum College in Virginia and becomes a first-round pick. An amazing journey. Clear Hall of Famer for me. And I think, Booney, there's a decent chance he gets in this year.
And Billy, the reason I'm voting for him, the only reason is because I never got a hit off him, and he drove me crazy. I'd come into the game and I'd be like, I see the ball this big off Billy Wagner. I mean, I saw it as good as you could see it. I could not square it. I would pop it up every single time. I think, and I look through my career, because closers aren't where you make your money. That closer comes in. Hell's Bells used to play, or
Yep.
Enter Sandman. It's usually not a good feeling for the opposing hitters. It's not like it's our funnest at bat of the night. But I remember Billy Wagner, and I'm like, one day I'm going to get a hit off this son of a bitch. And it never happened. It never happened. Him and Rob Nen. I could not get a hit off Rob Nen. I hit a double off Rob Nen in spring training. And I looked at him at second base, and he kind of looked at me and goes, you know, that doesn't count. I said, I know, Rob, but it felt really good.
Rob Nen. Man,
he was so
dominant. Smoke on the water there in San Francisco. I loved watching him pitch. He was one of my favorite closers of the late 90s, early 2000s. Of course, a huge part of the Marlins World Series team.
Yeah, he was nasty.
I loved watching him pitch. And again, thinking about great entrance music, you've got Enter Sandman, Smoke on the Water. I think those are probably two of the greatest entrance songs ever for a closer.